Welcome to today's CIT Tech for Business podcast. Today we are sitting down with Kyle and Chris, and we're going to be talking about the return of investment, but really diving into the return of technology investment will be the discussion point today. So starting off, I'm going to be asking Kyle, Chris, and Kelsey's also here from the marketing team of what was the first PC that you purchased. So I'm going to go first, and then I'll hand it off to Kelsey, but I recall it was a big thing in my household that we purchased a compact PC way back in the day, the big monitor that took up probably the whole desk and then the tower as well. So I remember it very vividly. It was the best thing since sliced bread back at that time. But I'll head it over to Kelsey and then we'll kind of do the round robin as you guys answer that question for me.
Oh, sounds good. And I have to ask, what year was that?
Oh, girl. I think I was in 8th grade back in the day, and that was a while ago. The 90s.
I feel like it was a while ago. You're like nondescript. No, I'm trying to think back. I'm like, man, I have been a Mac user for longer than I care. As far as what I bought personally, I think that was one MacBook like 5 years ago. I'm dating myself and I'm not very old. That college gave me a laptop and then I got hand-me-downs. I remember as a child getting in my room, right, the hand-me-downs of the computers, and I had the iMac with the round base and then you could swivel the monitor on the top because that was the super cool thing. So not exactly a PC, been a Mac user for way too long, but as far as anything I purchased, that's as far as I got. I'm going to hand it over to Kyle.
All right. Well, I'm going to really date myself. So if you go way back, Commodore VIC-20 was my very first computer. If you get into the PC world side of it, my dad was given got an IBM PC with a 10 meg hard drive on it and an amber screen side of it. And I flipped from Commodore to PC at that point and started to learn DOS. And I think the DOS version was, I think it was at 2.0 by that time. But I mean, so old school dot matrix printer, and it had a 1200 baud modem on it. So got on BBSs and CompuServe. So there, I really dated myself as it goes back. But yeah, that's a long time in the archive. So
yeah, we don't have to give our age on these podcasts. We can just let people think
you,
that we're
you
all
can
young.
figure it out at that point.
Yeah.
I can do math.
What about you, Chris?
Well, yeah, so my first PC came as a part of my college experience in the middle 80s. So I was in college. In order to get all of our papers done, we had to go to the computer lab at the time, type them up on the computer lab and print them. Well, the computer lab was so busy back in the middle of the 80s. Everyone was transitioning from typewriters to doing them on a computer. I convinced my parents the only way I was going to graduate from college is if they'd buy a computer that I could use so I didn't have to wait for time in the computer lab. So we ended up at a company called PC Express, which a lot of you may have heard of. And I bought my first computer back in the middle 80s to do basic word processing, typing up college papers on. So that's dating myself. That means I was in college in the mid 80s.
Somebody's doing the calculations already.
I said that one's easier math. We're going, okay, yep, we got it.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for sharing. I loved being able to hear that. So it kind of brings us back, but let's take a little step forward and get back to the podcast topic. So my first question to the group is, let's talk about the return on investment for technology. Like, what are some examples and how do you set a return on investment?
Well, it's super simple right now. As you look at the return, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that you got your capital expenditure or your operational expenditure, but trying to find that return on that to say how does it affect the business. Some of technology investments are obviously easier than others. If you have something that's an ERP software package, for example, that enables particular function side of it, you can look at your costs and then look at your overall revenue and say, okay, we're able to do this new initiative, so that's our return. The other areas are definitely more where you have to take more of a holistic and understand the full benefits, and it starts introducing more soft returns that are definitely harder to measure for many organizations. So for example, if you take, how would you measure if you bring in a managed service provider and now your internal IT is relieved of day-to-day infrastructure support, but now focuses on data business needs and data that benefits the business, that allows the business to find a differentiator in the market or gives their sales staff more information or more data to be more competitive in whatever market they're in or how they serve their customers, then if you have true measurements on it, now you just looked at the investment on the managed service provider provided return. So there's a lot of factors to take into account when you look at these initiatives. And I think many organizations we speak with look at IT as just a pure expense. Unfortunately, there's some parts of technology they'll say, but otherwise they look at it like it's an expense. It's an operational need that they have, but they don't necessarily look at it as a competitive advantage that they can use. Not all organizations, but many do. But there's certainly a wider reach to get into, and I think that's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, and I would agree with. I mean, you have to really look at that soft and hard cost on the return on the technology investment. And I think if most organizations look at their large costing areas, right, labor cost is one of the biggest costs for most organizations. And to make employees not only efficient with technology, more efficient, and then to make sure that technology is always accessible, because most organizations without the technology really struggle to continue to operate these days without the people and the technology hand in hand. But like we talked about at the beginning, the return on technology investment is, I look at it like return on marketing investment to some degree. It's very difficult to pinpoint specific where, I bought this user a new computer. What is it returning to me? Well, it's a bigger picture discussion than that detailed. I think it's bigger picture around people productivity, which is one of your largest costs. And then it's really get into the software efficiencies of how the organization runs on top of the technology. And then that gets back to Kyle's point about using a good managed service provider to provide that day-to-day support and really let your internal people be more effective on the technology and using the technology and more so the software. So I think that's really where that productivity and return on that dollar spent comes into play.
Yeah, and I could give you a good example where we identify many cases where there can be, much easier measurable sides is when you look at an organization, if you're using products like Access or Excel to, run reporting or to get data analytics where you're extracting out of different systems and combining, and it takes, hours and hours and hours to massage and get that information to the key metric that you're trying to get to. Taking advantage of many new initiatives like Power BI that's in Microsoft and a lot of other tools out there where you take what takes hours or days and make it into minutes. Now you got some easy, tangible, measurable side of it. But again, the key side of it is, are you manually asking people to, combine and aggregate data in some other ancillary program versus taking advantage of automation and data dashboarding, data, analysis tools that are more modern, that if you put a little dev time in and you put a little development side of it, now you just, multiply that over the number of work days, that's a huge return on the investment. And that's where having that person focused and understand those instead of worrying about patching computers and providing, password reset support and those, basic level, that's where you really start to drive that return.
I wanted to say, Chris, thanks so much for bringing up the return on investment for marketing. That is something too Kelsey and I strive to provide, to individuals here at CIT. And, as we're talking about the different technologies, it's kind of to know we're very data driven. We got to know the data and kind of see that coming in to be able to connect those dots. But talk to me a little bit too. We're unique in the fact that we're a managed services provider. So we get a lot of data from our customers. Talk to me about what that data means to us and how we can help them talk to customers about their technology investment.
Well, when we look at the data, we're looking at, a lot of key decision metrics like age of assets, your up, down, common areas of call support that come in. So where to invest, the time and resources to return back to productivity side with it. So, getting organizations on a regular cadence of keeping, your infrastructure, your technology in a current state within, X number of years side of that, and providing with a roadmap to say, we're going to make an investment of X amount every year to keep this up. Now you add predictability to the IT spend with it. And it also keeps your users more productive because you don't, overrun the technology's useful lifespan with it, and or avoid potential unexpected outages that stops their productivity altogether. That coupled with the security aspect of it, of bringing in risk reduction security solution sides that ultimately works to reduce the likelihood of a security incident occurring, also makes that, a very strong investment back to, avoid a very tragic, whole business interruption that could occur if you don't, take those preemptive steps to reduce those risks and close risk loopholes that may exist in the organization. So there's a lot of those efforts that go into the platform that, ultimately return a lot back to the organization just by planning and execution of a framework into those companies. It allows them to focus on what they do, their organization does to whoever their customers are, and allows us to do what we do really well, and just take care of the core foundational technologies.
Yeah, and I really think consistency, proactivity, trying to stay out in front of all these technology changes, right? I mean, I kind of correlate it to doing, preventative maintenance on your vehicle, right? I mean, a vehicle is another thing to really justify return on investment. I'm got to buy it, and all it is sunk cost. But if you kind of stay in front of and you keep up with your maintenance of your technology and stay consistent on your gear, and you do preventative maintenance, and a lot of that these days evolves around security, right? To try to keep your data protected and keep this network running, because without it, the organization really starts to suffer. So we need to keep it secure. We need to keep it functional. And the way we use data to predict that is looking forward to say, stay consistent on your gear. Don't run it too long, but get the useful life out of it. Just spending wise dollars on trying to get out and predict technology spend versus always staying reactive. That gets very difficult to show return on reactive technology spend, both software and hardware costs. So we try to help organizations stay out in front of it, predict it, stay consistent on costing around the return.
Yeah, and I know if we have some returning listeners, we've done a couple of podcasts on budgeting for technology and also the risk with cybersecurity of running technology that's no longer, in play, so it's end of life. So if you haven't listened to those podcasts, here's my plug to say, go back and listen to those, because we are kind of seeing a lot of connecting the dots of there is really a key metric that you need to focus on with this return and keeping your technology up to date. But one other question that kind of comes to mind as we're talking about this is, who really owns the return on investment for technology within an organization? Who's responsible for that?
Yeah, I think it's high level, and it's really part of the leadership, and it's across all departments, right? Because these days, most everyone in the organization touches some piece of technology, even out on our manufacturing clients, out on the shop floor, they're touching technology to make the manufacturing process more efficient. So I think it's complete buy-in from the leadership team, starts from the top down, CFO, CEO, to say, hey, we're spending a lot of money on technology. We need to get the return out of that. And some of that does come into play with efficiencies of resources, right? I talked about it earlier that people are really expensive costs these days and not getting any cheaper. So we need to make sure our employees are efficient as they can be with utilizing current and best practice around technology, right? And that becomes very tricky because it isn't always buy the latest and greatest and buy the fastest and buy the best, because we have to really look at balancing the hardware side of that return on investment, the software side of the return on investment, the on-prem investment, the cloud investment, it's a balancing thing that I think it's all sides of the organization, all the leadership team and departments need to be a part of, and I think they all need to own that, right? Too many times it falls back to just the CIO or the IT director to say, hey, what's the return? What's the return if I turn it all off, right? What's the downside to that? So it's across the organization. We need to look at it from gain efficiencies, more productivity from our largest cost, which is people and typically products.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is definitely at the leadership layer within the organization side with it. I mean, and when I mentioned earlier about organizations looking at IT as an expense, typically what we find is the organizations that have moved beyond that and realize that it's an investment and there is a return to be had with those. Those are organizations that, they progressively invest into those and they see measurable returns, and those organizations grow, and they seem to, they be able to, they service their customers better, and they continue to, view IT as a strategic difference maker for them. You can see it as a third party when we work with them versus when the top down is just, always hesitant to make that investment side of that, and fights against it and always sees it as just an expense. They just seem to be constantly always having problems with it too, because they just don't make the proper investments. Hence, it's kind of fulfilling their own prophecy to some extent. They just continue to have more IT problems, because they just didn't make the right investment sides of it. But yeah, it always stems back to where the organization's leadership philosophy is with the IT, and if they view it as a strategic side of it, and they make the right investments and they measure those returns, and they believe in it, we see organizations do amazing things with the technology and data and how they differentiate themselves in the market.
Well, and Kyle talked about strategic, right? We've really shifted our conversation around technology to strategic with the leadership of the organization, right? It's no longer just an internal IT department discussion. It is a very strategic discussion with the whole leadership team, with the ownership team, to understand what is this technology returning, right? Why are we better? How are we better? And what does it look like? How does it return, right? So if you look at how we approach our managed service business, it's all about that strategic component of technology and how does it return, right? Without it, adding to it, moving the dollars that we spend on different pieces of our technology. The cloud has really changed that whole question about return on investment. As we move more and more workload up to the cloud, that changes our investment in technology, because we're not building out these data centers internally or shared data centers. We're building out more cloud enablement, cloud redundancy. So it's not necessarily changing the dollars, it's how we're spending them to be more strategic, and at the end of the day, return more investment on that. So it is very strategic. It's all in. The whole team needs to be involved in it.
So we kind of then talked about really who owns that, but let's talk about how do you decide which return on investments are important based upon the ownership of that? Where do you kind of lay that landscape to say we need X, Y, and Z return on investment, and we need to monitor that?
Yeah, I think that's really unique to each organization. It's really trying to understand the strategic side of it. But as to Chris's point he just made, you have to. There's an educational component to leadership to understand, what technology is capable of, for one, and aligning that with what the businesses or organizations are trying to do. And then you can identify those additional areas of ROI, and then you can introduce measurements to those. So when I mentioned the case of the Access and Excel, for example, I mean, it starts to be easy. If you identify those within an organization, you can start to quantify labor costs, going into those things, and then identify, the cost return for making the investment to automate that in a level side with it. But those only come after you have, conversations between the technology folks and the business leaders, so you can correlate what's capable, because most leaderships don't understand. They don't know what they don't know. So it comes with collaboration and understanding, but that's why we have to be very strategic and get to the leadership levels to help educate and knowledge and present, potential solutions as to how they can benefit to allow those organizations to go forward. So it is very fluid. There isn't, I think, a one size fits all in that category at all. It takes, buy-in from the leadership, and then collaboration between that leadership and the technology department they have, or, plus outside partners really maximize what benefits could be there for them.
Well, Kyle talked about strategic efficiency and productivity, right? And I think you can go through every department. A real simple one I think is looking at sales and marketing, right? How efficient is our sales team by using the technology we have in front of them, and that's both hardware technology and the software behind it, right? So it's balancing all that together with strategic productivity and efficiency. It's not easy. It's not easy to put numbers around that, but it's understanding that model that really when organizations really figure that aha moment out of, right, wow, by doing this with technology and this with data and this with applications, our people are X percentage more productive, right? It's easy with a salesperson. You can say, hey, we enabled X, Y, and Z technology, which enabled our sales reps to sell 25% more, 50% more without hiring more staff, right? There's an easy one to correlate, but we talked about marketing. It's not quite as easy to do that, right? Because a lot of that is really big picture, brand, name recognition, that it's not as easy, but still enabling technology around faster, better use of data should return the same way that it does in a simple sales model. So strategic, productivity, efficiency. I think those are big things that the organization needs to look at top down.
Awesome. Love all of this. This is great. I did want to ask though, like, what's the trigger points to take action on some of these return on investments? Is there something you're like, yep, I see that right now, and it's a trigger, and we need to take the next step with that?
Well, I think some of that is, how far behind are you, or how far maybe are you too far ahead, right? And that when I say too far ahead, maybe we've spent a bunch of money building out internal data center infrastructure, but our long-term strategic plan is to move it all to the cloud. Well, we need to be efficient about that internal data center build out if our goal is longer term to move it all to the cloud. Let's not buy 10 years of technology. Let's buy 3 to 5 years of technology, because when we move it to the cloud, we're going to spend it differently, right? On the flip side of that, if we're so far behind, we need to just catch up so our users of technology are at least current, but then how are we going to affect the change of buying them new, faster, bigger, better technology, right? So to me, it's that balancing act of, right, we can't get too far out on spending money to think we're going to have a return if we're changing our concept around prem versus cloud. On the flip side of that, we can't get too far behind, and we have such a large catch up to do that. Do we ever get to the point where we realize the effect of buying new technology if we're always trying to catch up? So there again, it's that balancing act of trying to make it all come into play, and then how do you measure that?
Yeah. I think, having organizations have in the leadership side, have a real discussion and eventually have that map where you want to go, whether it's a 2 or a 3, or 5 year, if you say, where do we want this ultimately be? So you make those right, decisions now that are aligning with the long-term initiative where it's going to go. Very few organizations can just rip the Band-Aid off and make an entire shift, like Chris said, to go, we're going to be in cloud in the next 90 days. That's just not realistic. It's a plan. You have to start making the right investments now and investments in the upcoming months and years, near term, to align with where you're going. So you're making that transition, and then you're slowly realizing the return as you start to do that. But it's having a plan and working the plan as you go through that, and making sure everybody's on the same page to get through those. And for many companies, it tends to be, we'll hire a managed service provider, we'll take that side with it, and then you start moving to the whoever's in charge of IT can again start having more strategic discussions rather than being buried in the day-to-day, and then start that process going forward to figure out where they could go, what's possible.
Yeah, and it's such a big picture discussion, right? It's really the IT department's job to bring forward all this latest and greatest in technology, security, hardware, software. But really, it really goes back to the leadership and ownership team to really say, how can we use this effectively to be a better organization, be more productive? Because that, at the end of the day, is the return on technology. The IT department can come every day to that leadership team with bigger, better, faster stuff. that doesn't mean it's going to make the organization more efficient and return on the technology better. So it is a constant balancing act that IT needs to do. IT needs to do their job, providing a pathway, but the organization really needs to jump in and understand, how do we get the return from this, right? It's not an IT challenge. It's a whole organization top-down challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that just brings to mind, it's not IT's job to try to save you $5 on a monitor or $10 on the computers they buy. That's not the ROI that you're looking for. There's much bigger ROI to be had, and that's fortunately we do run into situations where that appears to be the case. Is it's just trying to shave dollars off of the product, the technology they're buying, but that's really tripping over the dollars to pick up the pennies in my mind.
I did want to say too, just selfishly from the marketing side, we look at the return on investment for the events that we put on, maybe for a webinar, and how many of our customers and prospects attended it. Same thing with these podcasts. We're looking at the trends to make sure that we're getting that out to everybody within our community to listen to these podcasts and, help that and educate them. But I did have a question about, how are you reflecting on those return on investments? Do you look at it at a 3 months, 6 months, quarterly, or like immediately, like I need to take care of these and then develop that plan based upon if they're monthly or quarterly goals? Can you guys shed a little light on that?
Well, I think it's all of what you just mentioned, Tara. I think there's immediate return on some purchase of day-to-day technology. Let's use a simple example of monitors, right? Kyle mentioned monitors before, saving $5. But if you look at our industry over the last 10 years, we now have users that have a half a dozen monitors on their desk, right? We used to have one screen, one small screen. We were trying to do everything. Well, what have we done? We've challenged the staff to be multitasking, right? To be more efficient. So buying them 1 or 2 or 3 more monitors so they can have all of their core applications up on their desk at the same time makes them more efficient. So that's a simple look at return on investment, right? You spend $125 on a nice big monitor and you give them multi-monitors, all of a sudden the user's like, wow, I can be X more productive because I don't have to switch screens all day long and waste time. Simple one, but there are other ways, strategic ones that go out 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, 5 years. And that, to Kyle's point, talks more to the cloud and the cloud migration and on-prem versus off-prem, right? Because that, like he said, you're not going to move your whole workload to the cloud in 60 or 90 days, right? That return on investment's not there. You're not going to change your ERP application in 60 or 90 days. So those return on investments are much longer, thought out, and budgeted processes that ultimately will return, but it's not immediate. Now, the monitor one, I would justify, give everyone monitors. If they've got more than one application running on their desktop, give everyone more monitors. They're going to be more productive. I am. So, I mean, everybody can be more productive. Simple answer, right?
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. I think, Chris, I mean, it varies. It really depends on, different aspects of it, but there's different levels of return at different time intervals throughout the investment side with it. I would argue, investments into different security solution sides of that, give you immediate return on the risk reductions. Deploying EDR, gives you, getting that deployed can give you an immediate, large risk reduction. Doing MFA, enabling that for your users, can be done in short term and dramatically reduce your risk. So there's, again, some very short-term returns, and then there's a long-term, but you got to work both. You got to be able to take advantage of both.
Yeah, there again, it's a balancing act. And I think another simple one is, we'll talk to organizations that have moved part of their workload up into the cloud, right? And they're like, well, the cloud application seems to be slow, right? Well, when we dig a little deeper, we find that they moved a whole bunch of workload to the cloud, but what they didn't do is increase their internet pipe, right? So we can immediately come in, assess the size of that internet connection and say, wow, by just turning the dial up a little bit or doubling that bandwidth, wow, productivity went up double because we've got more bandwidth. The application runs faster. Talk about another immediate return. That's as easy as the monitor one.
Yeah. There's some simple things for sure, but
they're not
it's
all
kind
that
of
easy, right? I mean, you talk about ERP changes, you talk about platform changes. Those are much trickier, much more thought out. That total return. I mean, if you look at an ERP change, those ERP changes can last 10 years before you may see all the return on that investment. So there's not a one size fits all return on investment. It's trying to keep up strategic, make sure everyone's on the same page, take advantage of the easy, quick return on investment items, monitors, bandwidth, those types of things, and then look further out strategically on how do we make changes in bigger picture platform stuff, ERP changes, infrastructure changes, prem to cloud changes are longer term.
Yep, absolutely.
Great. So besides everybody needing to ask their leadership members for more monitors, I have 3 today. So I'm thinking I might need a 4th. But all joking aside, oh, Chris, you need a monitor, another one?
And what is your thoughts on productivity with having more monitors, Tara?
I love it. So marketing, we're in stuff constantly, different applications that we run. Especially Kelsey and I communicate via Teams constantly, so it's nice to have that. And then other applications that we can quickly get to and answer. We're kind of a happening department where there's a lot of things going on because we do touch so much at CIT. You know, we talk about marketing to our customers, but we also market to our internal employees as well, so they understand too CIT what that message looks like. But it helps me. I can't stand working on a monitor just on my laptop. It drives me nuts because I feel like I'm not getting anything done today.
But that's a perfect example of IT's job is to bring to you, hey, Tara, in marketing, maybe more monitors will help you be more efficient and do more, right? IT shouldn't be coming to you saying, hey, I'm going to save $20 and not buy you any bigger monitor or more monitors, right? It's their job to provide the technology and the options. It's your job to be more efficient with it. So a perfect example of what we talked about earlier with IT's job and how that correlates into departments and leadership and organizational efficiency.
Yeah, and I think that speaks very well. I mean, Tara being the head of marketing, recognizing where the benefits could be and saying we will have productivity, and then letting IT know that there be productivity enhancements because of that. You know, not IT trying to figure it out. It's not really they're there to provide the solution for that. But you know, again, as from the leadership standpoint, you're able to identify it and say, yes, you know, this would help. So there's an educational side, maybe to let the leadership team know these are things to look for. Now they know to look for it. Now they can identify, and you can make the right business decisions to have that return. So that's a good example. Yep.
Absolutely. I'm going to be typing up my email to say I need another monitor. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe that's the next question for our podcast is how many monitors do people have? So we'll see
look
about
at the
that.
simple math on it, right? The simple math is a monitor, $125 monitor versus what the organization pays you to do your job, Tara. Look at that relative to your cost, to the cost. It is so simply justifiable, the return on that, right? That's the things we need to start looking at when we invest money in technology at the end of the day. It's not that difficult sometimes, right? It's not that scary.
Absolutely. That was a great point. Do you guys have any last thoughts about our topic before I get us wrapped up and kick you off the call?
Yeah, I think we dug into that one pretty deep, but go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
It's really about all organizational buy-in from the leadership and ownership team down to the IT department. It's really everyone working in sync to make sure that returns there. And it's not all about spend. It's not all about, let's just ride out technology. It's finding that balance. It's finding the return, and it's organizational wide. It's not just an IT issue.
Yep. Yeah. I would agree with that. It's just really aligning what you're purchasing for technology aligned with the business strategic component is going to introduce ROI. You know, if you're just going around and purchasing computers because you know they need a computer, but there isn't any rationale or connection to the longer term strategic, you're not going to realize the full ROI of what you could. So, have that collaboration, have that understanding, bring in a technology partner if you need to help, bring in the suggestions and what they see, because as an outside partner in many cases, we get to see so many different use cases of the technology and potential sides of it that, can get the wheels turning a little bit for many organizations, say this could be possible. And that's a value add that a partner can bring.
Great. Thank you guys for summarizing that. I will add a couple of things that we did discuss today about the return on technology investment. We really went over what is that return on investment, how do you measure that, and who really owns that return on investment that you're looking at, and really how do you reflect on those and making sure that you have that plan in place. And again, I had mentioned we do have some other podcasts that really kind of correlate to today's discussion as well. So if you haven't checked those out, please go out and listen to those other podcasts. But a big thank you to Kyle, Chris, and Kelsey today. You guys understand that we love to talk, and we tangented a little bit about the monitors, but I think it was a wonderful discussion and a very key point. So Chris, thank you for bringing that up. But I wanted to say, if anybody wants to provide some feedback, please do so. You can always visit cit-net.com/podcast, or you can simply email Kelsey and I, which is info@cit-net.com. But thank you so much again, and we look forward to chatting with everybody next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.